These are wooden box traps designed to catch rabbits and squirrels. They're 2 feet long, the bottom was made out of 1x8 lumber, and it's designed just for rabbits, but it'll catch squirrels too. The top 2 were made out of 1x6, and I made those just for gray squirrels. They're the right size. It'll cost you about $10 to build one of these, plus or minus $1 or $2. Varies by the price of the wood. We'll take the bottom one apart and you can see how it works, and then you can modify it any way you want to for make it bigger or smaller depending on what kind of animal you're after. They lift the hood and let you see what's inside of it, and then show you a little bit of details on how to build one. The trap's set now. The door is up. The animal walks in, comes down into the trap for the bait that's right back in here. He steps on that piece of wood, and when he does, you can see there's a piece of wire that runs up from that's called the treadle. That piece of wood's called the treadle. Runs up from the treadle and is in the back of the door. It's just a friction fit. But when he steps on the treadle, so it lifts that wire and the door falls. When the door falls, this wire, you see it, falls behind the door, stops on that screw right there, and that locks the door. So the door is locked. To open the door, you have to lift that wire up. You do it, you left a little bit of nub sticking out and bent over that you can twist like that. So that's it. That's the mechanism. Here's the locations for the holes for the wires for the door and everything else. The door wire, the hole for it, which is 1/8 inch, is 3 inches back from the front and 1 inch down. The door lock wire is 8 inches back and 1 inch down. That's a 3/16 hole. It needs to be a little bigger so that wire will turn freely. The hole for the treadle is 8.5 inches in and 1/2 inch up from the floor. We'll take the trap apart now and you can see it then a little better. To do it, we're just going to grab the wires on the end and straighten out that bend, and then the wire will pull out, then we can take the parts out. Here's the parts: the treadle, the wire that holds the treadle in the trap, the door lock wire, and the door, and the wire that holds the door in the trap. This wire is 12 gauge galvanized, but other wire would work just as well. 9 gauge would work well. 1/8 inch welding rod works well. The door has 2 screw eyes in the corners, 1/2 inch down, 1/2 inch in. The wire that goes through the trap hangs on those, and the door spins on the wire. There's a screw 3¼ inches down and centered. That's what stops the door lock when it drops. I used a screw here instead of a nail because it's rounder on the top and it's less likely an animal's going to hit it with their head and bang themselves up than with a sharp edged nail. The screw eyes on this trap were a little big for the wire, so I just took a pair of pliers and mashed them some and tightened them up. The dimensions on the door, it's 5 3/8 inches wide and 7 inches long. This is the door lock wire. To bend it, it starts out with a 16 inch piece of wire. I mark the 8 inch point on the wire, dead center, and then measure out 2 inches, 2 inches, mark it, mark 4.5 inches up, that's 4.5 inches, mark it, and then take my pliers and bend it at the marks, and they come out pretty good. You're still going to have to mess with it some, I imagine, to get it to fit perfectly and to swing right. These things tend to want to bind, but you'll fool with it enough to where it'll swing freely. We're looking at the underside of the treadle. It has screw eyes just like the door does. The dimensions 4 3/4 wide and 3 3/4 long. This is the treadle. The treadle wire is attached to the top and held down with 2 staples. You can put the wire on either right or left side of the trap. I drilled another hole on this side of the treadle just so you can see, but this is an extra treadle wire. It's bent on the end, and that bend goes in that hole right there, and that keeps it from rocking back and forth. Then it's held down with the staples. This is a treadle wire. You start out with a 14 inch piece and bend it like this. This is a 1/2 inch up. That's what's stuck down in that hole in the treadle. That's 2 1/4, runs across the treadle. 6 inches up, and 5 inches over. And then this is the end that goes on the door. When you're bending these things and cutting them, you can do it with this general shape and pattern and dimensions, and then put it in the trap on the treadle, and then with the door in there, and adjust it till it works right. You may have to cut it off a little bit, bend it a little bit differently, but eventually it'll work. Now we can put the parts back in it. Put the door in first. And once you stick that wire through, you want to take your pliers and bend the other end down, and then that holds it in the trap. Everything's back in the trap. She's working good. This trap was designed for rabbits, and they left the designer, who I don't know who they were, but they did a good job on this thing. But they left a gap at the top of the door for airflow, and that'll keep an animal from overheating. This was originally used as a research trap for a rabbit research project. And so I don't really like that gap up there, but I do like the airflow. And so I've just added another wire across the top that closes that gap and still has the airflow. I'll show you. There's the 2 wires running through the trap, one for the door and one just to block that gap. For that added wire, I just drilled a hole 1/2 inch up from the door wire. This trap is set up for cottontails, and so the spacing is just right for them. When he comes in and steps on the treadle, the door will fall, goose him on the butt, and he'll hop in. If you're building this for something longer, you probably want to move the parts outwards, like move the door towards the front. You got at least 2.5 inches. You can move the door that way, and then move the door lock wire with it. Just drill new holes. And then on the rear of the trap, you can move the treadle at least 4 inches and still have room for your bait. All you'll need to do then is extend the treadle wire, and then you'll have a trap that'll for longer animals too. To set the trap, you turn the door lock up, spin it. You can grab it from the outside, spin it up, put your hand in the trap. You'll be doing this all by feel. Reach back and grab the wire, then you're going to bring it and attach it to the back of the door. It's a friction fit, and there it goes like that, and that's all there is to it. If you set this trap and you have your bait getting stolen, it might be because it's too tight. And so the way to adjust it is to grab the wire, you reach your hand in, grab the wire, you can bend it back a little bit, and that'll lighten it up to where it falls easier, it takes less weight to trip it. If you find that you're catching animals too small, like a wren, and you want it a little bit heavier, you just bend the wire forward, and that'll make it harder to go off. This is the back of the trap door. On this particular trap, the wood was so slippery I wasn't getting a good grab with the wire. And so I just put a small dimple in it with a drill, and it works well. That's where a lot of this stuff is with these traps. If it doesn't work right at first, you just keep messing with it until you get it. If you want to test fire the trap in the field, take a stick or a piece of wire and stick it in the back of the trap. You mash down on the treadle, and that'll tell you how much weight it takes to trip it. That was just right. You can make a bigger version if you're trying to catch cats or possums or raccoons using plywood, and maybe make the trap 3 feet long instead of 2 feet, and use 12-inch sides instead of 8-inch sides. And but the mechanism will be the same inside. To build one of these, the sequence that I do, I cut all the wood first, then I put the bottom and 2 sides together, mark the holes and drill them. Then I work from front to back and do the door, get it hanging, do the door lock, make sure it's working right, then work on the treadle, put it in, see that the trap fires right and everything, then put the top on it, nail it down, and finally put the hardware cloth on the back with the staples, and lastly that board at the very back to hold the bait in. You need 4 pieces that are 24 inches. We're going to turn the squirrel loose. It's just a matter of turning the trap over, releasing the wire, opening the door. He's under the door right now. Get on back there. Get on back. There we go. Now.